morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above.
And hello. Hope you're having a good Friday afternoon. It's the end of the week. I am very tired, but the geek in me wants to solve a minor challenge that I've encountered with PowerShell and managing Docker. Last night I made a video about updating Nav Container Helper to the new BC Container Helper, and that involved clearing out old containers and images and just starting with a clean slate in Docker so that when I installed BC Container Helper, I wouldn't have any old containers that could cause problems. Well, during that, I discovered I wanted to automate a step to deal with multiple containers or multiple images, and I didn't have a good way to do that with filtering and having specific requirements around what I want to do. So I thought I'd share that, and today I found a way to help parse the output of Docker commands in PowerShell, and I think that will be a pretty cool feature to know if you're having to manage Docker, which if you're dealing with Business Central development and you're working with Docker containers directly, this may be a good thing to know. And nothing earth-shattering about what I'm learning here. I'm sure PowerShell experts are saying, well, yeah, that's obvious, but it's new to me, and I'm an unwilling student of PowerShell. I'm only learning it in order to make my life easier so that I can be a little more lazy and not have to do tedious tasks, which is what it's very good for. So with that, let's switch to the next slide. Okay, so the fundamental challenge that I'm trying to learn about and tackle in PowerShell in this specific scenario is that when I issue a Docker command in PowerShell, it outputs the contents, but it appears to output it effectively as just text. It's not like an underlying object like when you're trying to work with modules. So when you say show installed modules or get installed modules, that command looks like it outputs text, but behind the scenes, it's really objects that you can work with and get objects and properties, and it's kind of nice to navigate that model. But in the case of Docker, it seems like it is an array of strings with one line being a string, which is one element of the array. So it's kind of tedious to work with. There's no great way to say, hey, I want all Docker images that do not contain generic in the tag and give me the image ID for all of those so that I can then run Docker commands based on the image ID. For instance, that's what I was trying to do. So it's kind of tedious, and I have learned that when you're working in PowerShell, my impression is you do not want to do string parsing. You don't want to do substring and do trims and search for specific characters, and it's just crazy tedious, and in any language that's not the most reliable method. So I'm looking for a better way to do it, and I tried a few things and I came across an interesting method for parsing this type of output in the case of Docker and making it more usable for subsequent PowerShell commands. So let's take a look at that. So in the video I did last night, for updating to BC container helper, I wanted to be able to remove all images except for my generic OS image, because my OS image hasn't changed, and so there's no point in deleting that. That's going to need to be re-downloaded and reused anyway. But I want to get rid of my sandbox images, so the sandbox 16.4, I want to scrap those. And it looks like I have an orphan dynamics nav. I can't quite tell on that one if that's a dependency or if that's an actual image. But I want to remove everything but my generic image. So how can I do that? Well, I had generic or Docker images. That gave me the image list. And I said, well, give me everything that does not contain the word generic. And that was pretty cool. You take Docker images, you pipe that out to select-string, you say pattern generic. So it'll say, okay, let me find everything that's generic. And you invert that by using the -not match. So that will give you everything that does not contain generic in the entire line. But then I didn't know how to say, okay, well, now that I've got that, give me just the image IDs that I can send that over to Docker RMI to remove those images. So this is my journey to learn a better way to do that. So let's dive in. And let me make sure to try and get the right screen this time so you're not staring at PowerPoint for 20 minutes. So here we are in my Docker container, and let's just start with that. So we have Docker images. Great, standard output. Docker images, pipe that to, let me just pull up the slide. Actually, I think I have it here. Okay, so select string pattern generic not match. Okay, perfect. So now we've excluded the generic image, and these images that we list here, I'm okay with deleting. Now, in this test, I don't know that they'll actually delete because I have some containers tied to these, but let's see what happens. So now that I've got this, I want to get the image IDs that I can do Docker RMI on these. Well, if I do Docker images -q, that command is only going to return image IDs. So let's just take that example. So that's a great way to return image IDs, but this output does not contain the tag. So I can't put my select string filter on it. If I try that, I'm going to get all 4 images. Well, I don't want that. I just want the 3 that do not contain the word generic. So how do I work with this output and extract just the image ID? Well, you could do some crazy parsing. I found several ways to do it, but they were really just cryptic and very character-based parsing. So I came across this, of course. I ended up on Stack Overflow, as always, and I came across this question. I want to take my output from Docker PS, and I want to sort it, and this person wanted to retain headers. Okay, well, it happens that someone at the very end, no votes, had a pretty cool answer, and it involved using I need to figure out what these are called in PowerShell, convert from -csv, a function submodule. And then what's cool about this is you take this kind of table-looking text output, you convert it to a CSV type object, I guess, and you can specify a delimiter. In this case, we're fortunate that Docker does output as a tab delimited output. And you can then add a header row. And what's nice about this is once you add a header row, those names become your field names or column names. So you basically define your field names, and then you can sort and you can do operations or get object values or field values based on those field names. So I thought that was pretty cool. So let's give that a try. So I've basically mocked up this. And so I'm saying Docker images -format. And so I'm, rather than having this full output, what I want is, I just want the repository, the tag, and the ID. I don't care where it was, when it was created, or the size, so I'm going to exclude those. I'm going to then send that to my select string to filter it so that I get all of the images that do not contain the word generic. And then I'm going to send that output to convert from CSV and use the delimiter tab. Now you'll notice there's some quirks here, and I can kind of presume why. This is the tick T. Apparently that's what they call that escape character, tick. It's like right next to the number 1 on your keyboard above the tab, at least on the US keyboard. So you do tick T delimiter as the parsing delimiter to convert that output to CSV, whereas when you're doing the format on Docker images, that uses \T for a tab delimiter. Go figure. Probably inconsistencies between the Docker formatting in a Unix style and tick T on the PowerShell style. So then we're going to add that header, and in my case I have repository, tag, and ID, so I'm just using the exact same names as the kind of underlying column names in the Docker output. Then I want to sort it. I don't think I have to sort it, but I'm just going to sort it by tag, which may come in handy later. And I want to output just the IDs. I've learned that there is a for each operator in PowerShell, and you can type for each, or the kind of abbreviated method for each is the %, apparently. So I'm learning all sorts of wacky PowerShell syntax here. So I'm going to copy that and paste that into, let me just rearrange some windows over here. I'm going to paste that into my PowerShell session, and it automatically handles the line wraps here. So that is pretty cool. Let's say that I just wanted the repository names, or basically the image names. Oops, that's my sort. So I could do repository. So those are my image names or image IDs. No, that's what they call a repository. Image ID is the hexadecimal. So what's kind of nice about this is you're not doing string parsing, like low-level character-based string parsing. That's just crazy. This is essentially, it's like having a data table. And so I can now work with column names and it understands that concept. So really powerful. It's almost like typing your data rather than having this implicitly typed mess or pile of string array or array of strings. This is pretty cool. So I could output the tag if I want. So basically I can select whatever subset of data I want, whatever column or field I want, and then that is available to pipe to the next step. So let's change this back to ID. There's the IDs of the containers that I would theoretically want to get rid of if I were clearing out all my images, if I were clearing out all my containers and images in preparation for a update to BC Container Helper. Now, once I have that list, how do I then run Docker RMI on that? And I have a sample script, and this is basically saying for each, so for each of those values in my output, pass that into Docker RMI, and this is $_ is like the version of use the value that I'm passed in. So I'm getting a list of IDs, and I'm doing a for each on it, and for each of those individual values, pass that into Docker RMI, and this is kind of the generic variable placeholder to say the value that I'm receiving into this call. So let's give that a try, see what I can break or destroy here. So I have my pipe ID or %ID. I'm going to pipe that into, Docker RMI. And there we go. Cool. So of course I got an error, unable to delete because the image is being used by a running container. And I'm okay with that because my latest container, which I'm building every morning automatically, that's using an image. Cool. I don't want to delete that. So that's fine that that errors out. But I want to delete everything that's not being used. So up here, I had image test 1, 15 gigs, test 1, 15 gigs. And then I have that dynamics nav, none. So at least I was able to get rid of the images that weren't being used by my containers. Now I'm sure there's 3 other ways to do this, probably some more clever ways to do this using Docker commands like remove unused containers. But I don't know that this base generic image is being used by a container directly. This is just a stepping stone upon which this sandbox build is being created, this named image for BC. So if I ran delete all unused images, I might actually delete this generic. And I don't want to have to go download 10 gigs again because there's 0 value in deleting this and re-downloading it, unless my OS has changed, in which case BC Container Helper will re-download it when necessary. So this says it deleted something, perhaps 3, and we have 2 messages that CA and 50 cannot be deleted. So 50 is in use. CA is in use. Okay, let's see what it deleted. Okay, so it got rid of my dynamics nav none, but I still have test 1 and test 11. Okay, so in this case, really what it got rid of was this apparently orphaned generic OS image. So in this particular case, I probably could have used like the Docker images remove unused, something like that. But based on last night's video where I was wanting to clear out a bunch of old images, I think this gives me a little more precision. I'll have to see. Maybe that I'm overthinking this and an existing Docker command will get rid of it. But I think this will be helpful later regardless. Okay, so I thought that was kind of cool. Basically, the key point here is convert from -csv, and you can use a delimiter to parse that. In this case, the Docker commands output them as tab delimited. You can add a header, and that's pretty key to add that header back, because then you can subsequently perform sorting on that data if you want, and you can also output only specific columns of that output, which basically allows you to parse or filter based on the whole output of Docker, and then narrow it down to just the column you want to then pass that 1 column value to subsequent commands. So I thought that was pretty cool, and that took me a step closer to understanding how to parse this text-based, string-based data, which is not pleasant to do. And I like this technique. There may be other techniques. If you're aware of any, I'm open to suggestions. But this is pretty clever for the string-based tab delimited output. So I think that's it. That worked pretty cool. And took me a couple hours to figure this out. And it was pretty frustrating. Lots of dead ends. But hope you find this helpful and give it a try. Okay, have a good one.